Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, I would just like to make a few announcements. First, this event will be recorded, so please bear that in mind. Secondly, we'll be holding a Q&A session and discussion at the end. So if you have any questions or comments, we would love to hear those once all the speakers have presented. Finally, we'll be doing a short poll at the end of the event. And UC San Diego students who participate in the poll will be entered into a drawing to win a UC San Diego sweatshirt. So if you'd like to win some free merch, please stick around for that. And now we shall begin. Hi, everybody. My name is Claire Kim, and I am the coordinator for the Faculty Mentor Program. And I would like to welcome you to CRASH, the Conference for Research in the Arts, Social Sciences, and Humanities. And to kick off this intellectual discussion, here is Dr. David Ardis, Dean of Undergraduate Research Advancement, with a few opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. I will keep them brief because I'm so excited about this panel and this presentation. I have to say, I hope that we are all enjoying having a very good and varied Black History Month. There's so much to participate in this year, and the theme is wonderful and inviting and inclusive. So if this is your first Black History Month activity, there's still time to have more. And if it's not, I hope that this one will be one of the highlights of your Black History Month at UC San Diego. I'm also very, very proud that this is a CRASH event. As Claire said, CRASH is our Conference for Research in the Arts, Social Sciences, and Humanities. I like to think that this is a place where we can discuss the original university questions about who we are, how we express that, how we reach out and touch each other in ways that are more than superficial, more than translational. And I'm very, very happy that we recognize the Black experience as central to all those means of communication and inquiry and study. So I want you to know that CRASH was conceived as a one-day conference, and in the last 2 years, and I think this year, especially under the leadership of Claire and Tyler Rogers and Adana Martinez, it's become a real conversation space. You can count on a CRASH event at least once a quarter, where we will have time for reflection and action and discussion. It's as lively as we can make it, but that always depends on how much we get people to participate. So please take this last comment from me as an invitation. If you like the idea of CRASH, if you like the event today, you can contact me, or you can contact Claire or Tyler and talk to us about what you would like to see CRASH take on. It is really the most welcoming university space that I can think of, and it's always one we would like to see grow. So with that, I am just so honored to turn things over to my friend and colleague, Yvonne Evans, who is a distinguished scholar and a dedicated administrator, provost, and I can tell you from having seen this up close, a real champion for our students' intellectual growth. So Yvonne, this is just terrific for me. The floor is yours.
So thank you very much for those very kind words, David. It's always wonderful working with you, especially because I also recognize in you a colleague who is truly dedicated to our students. And in given my own line of work, your work with undergraduate students is really inspiring and also very important. Name Yvonne Evans. I am in the Department of Sociology, and for the past 5 years or so have been provost at Eleanor Roosevelt College. I want to just associate myself with David's comments. This is a fantastic program occurring in Black History Month, an important event that brings our Black undergraduate and faculty scholars together. And I look forward very much to hearing their presentations. I don't have, Adana, a list of presentations, so I don't know what the order of presentation is. Does anybody have, do you have a list, a schedule, David? Oops, is David gone?
I'm very much here. I think if we just go by the order on the page, Christian will begin.
Okay. Christian?
Yeah.
Christian Johnson, would you introduce yourself, please, and fire ahead?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the event. My name is Christian Johnson. I am a senior political science major, and I'm a big theater nerd. So today I'll be giving a presentation on my work in CRASSH and my work with everybody else with the wonderful program that we've been all acquainted with. And it's really interdisciplinary. And to cut it short, let's just jump right in, shall we? So
Yes.
What is my research based on? My research project is based on my organization that I founded a couple years ago called Found Space. And you may be wondering, how did this begin? Well, it began with a quote that from the late American writer Amiri Baraka: "The artist's role in society is to raise the consciousness of the people, to make them understand life, the world, and themselves more completely." This quote always stuck with me throughout my entire term as an artist, as a student, as an advocate for many, many things of justice that I believe in. And you'll see that as my explanations. So you might be saying, what is Found Space? Where does this come to be? Well, I'll tell you. Found Space, my screen. Technical issues. So Found Space is a UC San Diego student theater organization. We started as a space created by BIPOC makers. It's developed into an initiative to put all BIPOC creators at the forefront of innovative performance at UCSD. When I first began my career at UCSD, I never really saw any performances or reflections of artistic expression that really showed something authentic to my experience or things that were very representative of the world that I lived in. And that was always something that struck a chord with me personally, because it made me feel, where is my voice? Where is my story? And rather than finding outlets that were already established, I decided to sort of strike out and sort of create that space for myself. And because I figured perhaps if I do something like this, someone else would be welcomed along with it. So what drives my research? Because we are focusing on really what drives Found Space to really create. It really boils down to my 3-step process: know your story, visualize it, build and share. So to begin, it's know your story. Consider what makes you part of your world. Is it your family, your education? And if I were to explore your roots, what would I find? Visualize. This is where we begin getting more creative with one's roots. I like to say roots because roots are our foundation. How do we add color, style, and a cultural signature to your story? And then lastly, we have the steps of build and share. This is where we get really interdisciplinary, because as we add structure and we share it, this sometimes takes the form of a production or some type of sort of reading, no matter what types of ways you see your story being visualized, whether that's through poetry, plays, film, what have you. The reason why I'll call it interdisciplinary is because I don't just bring in people from the backgrounds of performativity. My background wasn't in performance until I came to college. And I've been having the privilege to work with a lot of amazing people who didn't feel like they could even be part of theater in the first place. People who didn't feel like they were performers or actors or artists in any shape or form, but they were able to bring their skills and their backgrounds from their majors or their skill sets and sort of combine those with performativity, which I always found thrilling. Now, you might be thinking that was a lot to take in, but it really isn't, because all it boils down to is, how do you see yourself? I feel like this is a question that's really important, especially to BIPOC artists, because we're often given narratives to work from. We're never really given the chance to establish our own narratives or a point of departure in which we understand what am I even telling? What kind of stories am I telling? And what type of stories does the audience consume? And if my being is even part of that. A little bit of data shows you that from the 2017-18 poll by the Asian American Performance Action Coalition was that the current state of the theater industry has a bias for producing mostly Caucasian produced works disproportionately to those written by BIPOC artists. Now this data is just one of the many accounts of how performance in theater is polarized. And despite this data, many institutions fail to make tangible change. This is another reason why I've decided to have Found Space as sort of the initiative here on UC San Diego, to sort of be that space where BIPOC artists can write their works, create their works, and perform in their own works, because the industry as we see it outside of this institution is quite polarized towards our own experience. And I feel like being here at UC San Diego, being aware of those sort of disproportional accounts is necessary. And then how do we take the next steps towards that? And if you don't start here at the educational level, I don't think there's much change that's really going to happen outside of this structure that we have now. This also brings a question to what does this say about the institutions that foster our creativity? And that's another question that's come up in my research is what types of situations that we find ourselves in, and those situations that we find ourselves in fostering our creativity as artists of color. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. So the question is, how do we solve the issue? Well, it starts with the audience. And that's always been a point in the theater community that I've always taken a really close examination of, because oftentimes we say, oh, we're looking at things what's on the stage, but we're not really looking at what's, who's observing, who's consuming, who's taking in the work that we're putting out there. And it always starts with the audience. As creators and innovators, it behooves us to reach out to our communities. Theater has always been about the communities in which they've been performed in. It's been about telling the stories, about the histories, about the roots, and about what people are shown on stage. And I think when we think about the communities in which we're performing, if we as BIPOC artists are creating work that's representative of ourselves, I think it behooves us to sort of create those stories and not just give them to only a certain direct group. I think it behooves us to give to the communities in which we represent. So me as an African-American male, I think it's representative for me to sort of, when I create my work, give that work to my community as well, not just give it to one certain sector. Another point of how we solve this issue of polarized theater as it is now is to start implementing initiatives at the academic level. This is so that BIPOC students can learn to apply their knowledge creatively. Again, my background in theater has always been when I came to college. So had I not been exposed to it at this point, I probably wouldn't have been involved at all in any form of performativity. And I think and again, it's only happened because I sought it out. I don't think there's enough initiatives that really push for performance from our communities and in the academic setting. Because I think it's often seen as one-sided thing. Many people don't see performance as this interdisciplinary tool that can be used for many forms of education, for solving issues in society as well. And this brings me to my third point about how do you make performance interdisciplinary. The way I have made theater interdisciplinary is through most of my work. My show before pre-COVID was called We Wear the Mask, and throughout the production, I had many people who were from production performance backgrounds, but they were sort of able to bring in all their skills into developing a unique script and unique production for the audience to sort of consume that was saying, here we are representative of our identities, and let me give the gift to you. And I think that's something that me as an artist has always strove to do, is no matter what performance I'm part of, no matter what production I'm part of, I've always been called as a director, I've always been called the professor of director, because I'm always giving my actors and my production crew homework to do and bring in to me in next rehearsals. Because I want them to walk away learning something about themselves along with the production, because at the end of the day, I can give you lines, you can memorize them, and you can sort of give me a show. But at the end of the day, if you're not showing me a production that's authentic to yourself, I'm not going to want to consume it. I'm not going to want to know why, what drives you to do this piece, what drives you to do this. And for Found Space to sort of stand as this place where I can bring in individuals with many different backgrounds and identities, it's quite the honor. It's quite the wonderful social experiment as well, to see how what kind of stories come about and everything that I create and how many stories that are told. And how do I address many of the concerns in research now? It's been quite the interesting challenge, especially with our new age of virtual performances. So, but I'm embracing the challenge, and I think where we are now is a good point of where we can discuss how we as artists of color sort of interrogate and create a new initiative for ourselves, one in which we didn't have prior to the pandemic. So that was a lot to bring in, but that brings me to the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to questions at the end of the conference. You can please feel free to follow any developments with my research project, which is FoundSpace, at FoundSpace UCSD, and you can also email questions. So thank you.
Great. Thank you ever so much. Let me see. Yep, I thought I was muted. Thank you ever so much, Christian. And we will be having a Q&A at the end. I'm going to go on immediately to Joyous. What a beautiful name, Joyous Heron. Joyous, would you please introduce yourself and feel free to begin?
Yes, thank you so much. So yes, like Ivan said, my name is Joyous Heron. I am a third year literature for creative writing student, but today I'm going to share about my work with film. So I grew up always loving writing and storytelling because of the world making aspect and just the fact that it's an outlet, a place for me to write down my thoughts and ideas. But I got into film for a similar reason, but also because I began to see it as all the different art forms in one. So I'm really excited to talk about just my work today with film and how this particular project I'm going to share really expounds on the storytelling process. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so a couple years ago, my friend and I created this passion project called Prego. It's a working title. I'm sure you can imagine what it's going to be about, but yeah, this was a passion project that I co-wrote with my friend from high school. She directed it. I was able to produce it. And we got with different friends from my film program who are also Black and Hispanic people of color, just filmmakers, all students coming together to create this film. And as I was going through the process, I learned that I wanted to engage with the audience and other creatives in the process to consider how that influences the story during conception, production, the edit, the viewing, and all the way throughout the process. So I wanted to include a couple images. So here I have the producer's copy, so my copy of the script with different notes. So this is where we started. We started with the story and we just edited it down from there. So basically this film is a dark comedy drama about a young woman who visits her ex-boyfriend for the first time in 5 months to tell him that she's pregnant. So my initial role as producer was to oversee all the elements of production, from the writing of it to the filming and post-production, meaning I was responsible for everything from story to securing a cast, a crew, location, and shooting equipment for this film. So for me, taking on that role, it was definitely a great opportunity to learn. But my main interest for this film in particular was editing the film and having the opportunity to recreate and reorder and remediate the narrative. As I edited and watched the film myself, I became really interested in the viewer's thoughts about the film's subject matter and how this could actually aid my editing process. I wanted to explore the relationship between the film, the filmmaker, and the viewer. So I surveyed college-age peers before and after the viewing of the film to gather information about the conscious and unconscious impact of the film, but also how this particular media of film serves or doesn't serve a specific storyline. So some of those peers were interviewed verbally, others were asked to write down their perspectives, and some did both. And the questions that were asked of them was, what are your thoughts about women's and men's responsibility with regards to pregnancy? And does the dramatization of this subject make you think differently about women's and men's roles in childbearing and rearing? All right, so here we have just a couple more artifacts from the production. We have the call sheet and then notes from the script supervisor. That person really just looks at the script and makes sure the crew stays on track and making sure we're just recording all the different elements that we need to. We took a total of 1 day to shoot, 2 days to prepare, and we're still in the editing process because of this very special process of including the viewer and the audience in the production of the film itself. So rather than just releasing the film and being done with it, I decided to get viewers' responses and let that influence the final product of the film. Now I'm going to show you a clip from the film.
Ryan, can we talk? Amy's here. Ryan, Amy's here. Does this mean we're getting our little gang back together? Is it just me, or is our little friend Amy getting fat?
You're pregnant? You've been hiding your pregnancy?
Our pregnancy? Wait, you guys had sex? Gross. How could you hide your pregnancy? Don't judge.
Awesome. So that was a little clip, just a little snippet. The full film will be on YouTube at some undefined date because I really just enjoy allowing this project to be just a work in progress. My friend and I initially set out for it to be just a project that we could use to practice honing our skills as creatives. So for me, I'm continuing to hone my skills as an editor, as a writer, as a creator that thinks about how best to create works that impact people and have the most impact on them. And so this allowed me to just really engage in all those things in a very special way. So throughout this process, some different things that I've learned is that it's really, really important to involve other people in the filmmaking process. That's a natural given. Film is it's a very special medium because of how much collaboration it calls for. Everything from the writer, director, to people who do the lighting on sets, the actors, the makeup artists, and I could go on and on, especially depending on the caliber of that film crew and that film shoot. And so because the collaboration process is a given in filmmaking, I wanted to tease out and think more about how a variety of perspectives can influence a film. So I knew that as the editor, I would have a lot of control over the final construction of the visual story, but the audience's implicit and explicit biases influence their own perspective of the story overall. And these biases are often drawn out of them based on the images that they see. And this is what I wanted to uncover. So some of the peers' comments on the male character in particular was very interesting to me and something that I didn't even consider on my own throughout the whole process of this film until receiving feedback. So they talked about this character's immaturity. And in this story, so this male character, his name is Ryan, he's exaggerated to be very dim-witted and incompetent, especially with regards to pregnancy, and comedically so. And there are multiple television shows and movies like Baby Daddy or 3 Men and a Baby that portray men raising children in a family as out of place comedically, as dire and in need of female rescue more times than not. However, in other settings, men are portrayed as extremely capable, intelligent, and dominant at the workplace or school, or even when courting a woman. So I hadn't considered before how Prego converses with existing media until noticing viewers' reactions to the male character like these. And then I was able to survey for myself gender roles that I come to expect personally, and then readily accept in the traditional media landscape. And so this is something that I can think about as I continue to create, and what types of characters we create and for what intention. Another viewer brought up race relations and how the story would have impacted them if the characters were people of color. So both of these actors are white, and the third actor is biracial. So a question that she had personally for me was, would the audience members still be sympathetic with the protagonist? Would the character dynamics remain? Because many of the audience members had similar reactions, I'm curious to know what more people of diverse backgrounds would think after viewing this film. So other questions that came up for me was, what happens when the audience's mind is predisposed to subject matter because of the guiding questions? So I was also thinking about the meta fact of asking questions of the audience and asking them to think very specifically and pointedly about the subject matter and the effect that that even had on the way that they took in the film. Film can confirm people's pre-existing beliefs, especially when prompted beforehand in this case. I also wanted to consider, how can film account for audiences' biases when delivering a message? One viewer mentioned not even being aware of their own biases until I specifically questioned them. Something else I considered was, can film help audiences change their perspectives if they're not actively reflecting and communicating with others? So these findings helped me to consider more closely the effect of film on a viewer, particularly during construction of said film. So overall, some different things that I learned and took away from this entire project was that there's a lot to consider when creating film. It lasts forever. So I thought about choice. At every part of the process, people are making choices, from the script all the way to the very end. I learned that the collaboration process was paramount. So again, in every step of the process, there's also room for change as a result of the influence of those choices. I thought about who to involve and how to involve them and how that impacts the story. So again, for example, having white actors instead of actors of color surrounding this particular subject. And then I thought about portrayal. So how would people react if these were people of color? If these people were of a different gender or homosexual? And so the portrayal is crucial to the audience's response. And so I really wanted to bring that in there. And all of this has helped me to really engage with art in a very intentional way that I thought about before, but now I'm thinking more about. So yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Thank you, Joy. A really fascinating interior monologue as you produce your art. Very, very fascinating indeed. We'll take up any questions at the end. Next, I would like to ask Camille from the Department of Literature. Camille, would you introduce yourself and fire ahead, please?
Thank you. So I want to say that it's a pleasure to participate. This is my first time participating in CRASSH. And it's very exciting to be part of a conversation about art and performance. So I'm very thrilled to hear about what's going to develop as we have this conversation and have kind of feedback and interaction from all who are present. That's the part that I'm missing, really getting to see those faces and interact. So I'm looking forward to that. So my focus today, I am an associate professor in the literature department. I have been trained in African American literature and history, and my degree is in history of American civilization, which is an interdisciplinary field of study. What's happened over the years as I've developed my work in African American literature and cultural studies, I have moved increasingly to creative writing. So what I'll be talking about is my first book, which is a critical biography titled Introducing Burt Williams, and talking a little bit about this kind of question of filling historical gaps and what that means. And thinking about, for the benefit of those students who are wondering, well, how do I find that which I want to study? How might I approach it? How might I even think about it? So I'll talk a little bit about that and then shift to talking about my current project, which is a historical novel. I'll say a little bit about that, and then I'll finish with a reading from it. So beginning with this thought of filling in historical gaps, and it's very helpful for folks to know that this is going to give you a couple of images to kind of work with and play with, but you'll mainly be talking or listening to me, not so much following what's on your screen, but a way of kind of stimulating thought around this, this work of research in these areas. So when we think about probing the historical record, I always think that it's helpful to really get back or go to the kind of basic place in terms of thinking about what interests me, what really calls to me. So often the projects that we're really committing ourselves to are long-term relationships. It's so helpful to hear what Joya said about really relishing the process of developing the project, which is so fantastic when you can enjoy being immersed in the process before getting to that product, because that's where a lot of the juicy stuff happens, because you're following that passion, that curiosity, and often when others are involved in that process, there's such an aliveness to what you're doing. And that's important to find. I think it's important to think about, well, what do I really care about? What interests me? What would I want to spend some time really getting to know? And so often, especially these days, we find, okay, where do we find ourselves when you go into the internet rabbit hole? Where do we find ourselves kind of sucking up information and really getting curious? And sometimes that is a way that we get into deeply understanding what we want to know more about. Well, even pre-internet, which is when I worked on this project, started to think about some of these projects. It's very early on, is following this idea of curiosity and then wondering why are certain phenomena the way they are? Why do I understand aspects, in this case, aspects of African-American history in a certain light, in a certain way? Why am I inclined to understand things in a particular frame? And rather than saying that's the frame in which we've been taught, to think, well, how might I step outside of that? How might I move to an understanding that will allow me to see the constructedness of the frames in which we're reading, interpreting, and understanding cultural artifacts, cultural production. So that becomes an opportunity also to see what are the ways that I'm going to be approaching this subject or question. And then, of course, contemplating what I call the so what. This is a question that will come up from your term paper to your dissertation. You know, so what? Why does this matter? Why is this important? This might be a passion for you, but why should a reader, a listener care about this subject? And so that idea of reaching out beyond the individual. I love what our students have said about serving others who want to create, but also then as the creators, turning that out to even a broader public who obviously are getting to have registered their ideas about what really matters. And so that idea, that kind of dialogue or exchange is so important in what we do, so that it's not, we might say, a self-indulgent kind of investigation, but actually something that extends beyond the individual curiosity into something of value for others. And so that was my experience as I investigated Burt Williams. I saw this figure of a man who looked at the way he does in this picture off stage and the way he did in the right picture on stage. For me, my curiosity was, I'm really interested in African-American comedy. And as I looked more and more back in time, wanting to understand something about performance prior to stand-up comedy, I became more and more interested in Black theater, earlier Black theater, and would run into this figure, Bert Williams, understanding that he was extremely popular during his period. He was born in 1874, died in 1922, came to fame in around the 1890s. And he had a career that, today we talk about the triple threat, singing, dancing, acting. Well, he was kind of a dancer, mainly an actor, definitely a comic, and also someone who would eventually go into film. So he moved through a lot of different kind of forms of culture that were becoming part of the pop cultural forms that would later develop and eventually move into other forms that we, of course, continue to know today, like film. But having moved from theater performance and recording into vaudeville, some solo performance, and ultimately into into a film, really showed me this is someone with a lot of versatility. But what was interesting is he was a fair-skinned or light-skinned man who performed in blackface, who many said was not deeply involved in African American or struggle for liberation. And so there was a lot of criticism about him in the years following his death, and certainly in the late 20th and 21st century, really looking at this figure and having a lot of questions. So I wanted to know, who was he really? What was his story? Why is it so hard for people to face this figure? And I started to explore and understand some of the ways in which the call to blackface performance, that pressure placed on him came to be, the ways in which he would really be shaped by this expectation that a Black performer had to perform in blackface or had to perform stereotype. And what was also intriguing was when he worked with a partner, as you see here, Burt Williams performed with George Walker, Burt being on the left, Walker on the right. Burt wore blackface, Walker did not. Walker was a dark-skinned man, and he was the man who became really well known as a race man, as was said during that time, a real activist who was willing to speak out, whereas Burt was known as more introspective, quiet. So that started to really intrigue me, and I wanted to get to the answers about how do we understand who he is? How might we understand the blackface performer at a time when there was a lot of shame, there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of wanting to reject these figures. And what I wanted to do was open up the possibility of a dialogue. What could he be contributing? What could he be giving to the public that is worth our consideration? And what I learned was the ways in which he tried to use this blackface, the ways in which he tried to call attention to stereotype through performance that was deliberate, considered, that was often calling the audience in to understand the kind of texture and complexity of character, who was more quiet than an exaggerated buffoon, as often was expected to be the type of performance. That subtlety is what started to really draw people in. And that gave me a way to really push forward and saying, that's the answer. I want to understand how we might reassess Black performers who used blackface in ways that maybe help us better understand the times they were living in and the challenges they faced, and perhaps even better understand the contributions they made. So that was really shaping this kind of idea of gaps, this idea of in the historical record, why aren't we knowing who this performer is? Why is it so difficult to talk about what his particular contribution was? And this same kind of question becomes important as I shifted to my next subject. And it's helpful to kind of take a look at this Jill Lepore quote. She's a historian at Harvard who wrote, "Historians and novelists are kin, but they're more like brothers who throw food at each other than like sisters who borrow each other's clothes." Well, we might have some arguments about, whether brothers are the only ones who throw food at each other and if sisters are the only ones who borrow each other's clothes. But the point being that there's a fraught relationship there. And what I find find is for African American scholars who are really starting to see and understand the ways, and we know the ways in which there have been historical gaps that are not just about silences, but we might say more violences, that what we really need is to acknowledge the ways in which the novelists can do the work that historians sometimes can't because of access, because of whose stories have been privileged and whose stories have been silenced. And that silence is an erasure. That is a kind of violence that is done to the lives of those who did not enjoy and have the privilege of power. I'm going to move to looking at this and again, saying, you'll notice that it's a frame from before, because the same questions that come up even when we're doing this kind of work, to find and follow that curiosity, again, to wonder why isn't this story being told? And why is it important to someone else? I'll say one thing before I say, read a little bit. I'm seeing my time. And I don't want to go over time, but to think about Toni Morrison, her quote here is very helpful. She wrote in a book of essays about memoir, an essay titled The Site of Memory. She wrote, for me, a writer in the last quarter of the 20th century, not much more than 100 years after emancipation, a writer who was Black and a woman, the exercise of writing is very different. My job becomes to rip that veil drawn over proceedings too terrible to relate. And here she's talking about the slave narratives and the silences that exist in them. The exercise is also critical for any person who's Black or who belongs to any marginalized category, for historically, we were seldom invited to participate in the discourse, even when we were its topic. So here, as I've started working on a historical novel, I've asked that question. If these are stories that are marginalized, if these are stories that are not told, the historical record sometimes is not the place where I can find the answers. And sometimes it's in fact our imagination that supplies that opportunity to imagine the interiority of those lives. It's actually through what we might think of as invention, but is so often devoted and dedicated to incorporating a lot of historical research, that which is available, that really allows the stories to begin to be told. So I would love to, maybe if there's time and questions, to just talk a little bit about that kind of work that's done through fiction. But I will stop here and say thank you for listening.
Thank you ever so much, Camille. Clearly fascinating. A lot of comments, questions in the chat. But before we get to those, before we give you a chance to get to those, let me introduce Stephen Buscher. Stephen, would you like to introduce yourself and begin? And Stephen is from the Department of Theater and Dance.
Excellent. Woo! I already feel full from everything that's already happened. It feels like I'm taking. I feel like I've been in 3 different classes. This is amazing. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Joyous. Thank you, Camille. Ugh, my mind is already spinning. Where to begin? So my name is Stephen Buscher, and I'm a movement professor in the Department of Theater and Dance. And this is my first CRASH event as well. And I'm really excited to be part of how Black history, Black aesthetic, Black perspectives kind of weave in and influence the work we're curious about, and the work that we're doing inside and outside of the classrooms. I'm going to kind of go backwards and forwards, and then forwards and backwards, and then hopefully forwards and forwards. So forwards and backwards. The first thing I want to talk about a little bit, thanks Cody, is a project I did with a Kenyan artist, Sharifa Ali. This is a film, this is my first foray into virtual reality. So what happened with this piece is as a theater practitioner, we learn a lot about mythology, mainly from Greece. I think there's starting to be more different playwrights, more contemporary playwrights are weaving in Yoruba mythology, spirituality, and storytelling in there. And this is taking a Kenyan myth from the Kikuyu people. And just, you know, when the Kikuyu tribe, and just thinking about the Kikuyu people, they're 8 million deep. So it's not, you know, usually when I hear about a tribe, this is me. I think about a small group of people who are slowly disappearing. And this is not that. So this is a vibrant community in Kenya. And the story, the mythology that this is taking, and basically it's like, how can we take an old story, hundreds and hundreds of years old, push it through a VR lens and use technology and sort of like a high-end immersive experience to experience this storytelling. So that's where this is headed. So let me see if I can share my can people see this?
Yes.
Yes, you see two people in a tree? Okay. I'm hoping you see a tree. Say something if you see the tree. So this is,
Yes, we do see it.
oh, excellent, excellent. So maybe a little Afrofuturism. This story is about the central figure, who here is, you'll see, black, and skin will continue to change. The main character goes by they, them pronouns. And the story is, and this is a real story from the Kikuyu people, that if you go around this mugombo tree 7 times, you're able to change your gender. So that's where this story came from. And Sharifa Ali, the lead director on this project, was really interested in dynamics between parents and children, and what does it mean to be gay in this culture. So this character is in love with a boy from the village, and is battling demons in their head about should I, shouldn't I, and sort of has to make amends with who you are so that you can move forward. And because this is VR, you're seeing it sort of 2-dimensionally, but in VR you can go up to them, can go up to the lover who's also here, you can go inside that tree, you can go around that tree. So there's a lot to do. I'll just play you a little clip. And I was the choreographer, and I did a lot of narrative sort of storyboarding on what the storytelling sequences should be. So here's a taste of this. So if you were wearing the glasses, you could follow them. So that's a taste. That's a taste. And then there's let me jump to the end here, where there's a transformance when the lead character Wakiki actually accepts who they are. Here's the last.
A cause for celebration. The transition is complete. Wakiki is who they were always meant to be. Just as sure as we are one with land and sea, our spirit is within the Mugummo tree. Ancestors, we are everything and everywhere. We are Atomu. Atomu is the smallest piece of matter that retains its identity.
Yes, so that's
Beautiful.
that piece. The smallest piece of matter that retains its identity. So that so it's dealing with a lot of different it seems like contemporary themes. What does it mean to accept yourself? What does it mean to be able to be in love, to express love? What does it mean to be traversing the world through LGBTQIA plus lens? So that was that piece. So a little piece of maybe Afrofuturism. The next thing I want to share is I work with masks in the work I do, and I also work a lot with improvisation. And now improvisation in the theater has kind of been codified, not by necessarily a black lens. So what I do is very sort of like off to the side, but still doing it. So I am part of groups of folks who are reinventing, reimagining what improvisation can be inside and outside of the classroom. One of the things related to storytelling, because I work with masks, at some point it became important for me to have masks based on Black and African faces sculpted so that students, and this is the beginning, so that students can see themselves. So there's always this notion of, do you see yourself reflected in what's happening on stage, what's happening in the classroom, what's happening in the writing? How are you being reflected? So here's one of the masks that I had commissioned. That's one of them. Here's another one. And it's very intentional that there are different skin tones. Colorism in America, it's there. Ooh, you got to read Cast if you haven't. Here's another one. Here are the two. These are two celebrity masks. Yes, Natalia, one of these is yours. This was based on the comedian and actor Monique. Speaking of advocacy and someone speaking out about not getting paid, Monique. And you guessed it, Tiger Woods, with a little bit of a darker shade. And I'll also talk about this one. I don't know if you can see, but this mask has a gold grill. This mask has like gold fronts on the teeth. And this is, I did that because I was working with high school students at the time. And one of the students gravitated to this mask. I was working with students that were predominantly Black, Tongan, Samoan, Vietnamese, Cambodian, and Mexican. So one of the Black students gravitated to this mask, and he had gold fronts. And so he loved this mask and loved playing it. And the next day I went home and then I painted the teeth gold. And then I brought the mask back and he saw it. And he was quiet. He kept his, he was really excited about it, but you can't show how you're excited about it. You are. But it was really great. And I saw him light up when he saw the gold teeth. And he was like, "That's me." I was like, "Yeah, that's you." So that's how I'm using mask work, and actually I want to build the neighborhood. I've lived in a lot of different places. The only place I haven't lived is the South, but I've moved around a lot, and I really want to make different masks based on different cultural folks that I find in my classroom. So that's coming. And I guess the last piece I'll end with is this notion of advocacy. For those of you who don't know, um, the American theater is sort of in this moment of reckoning with a lot of advocacy around we see you white American theater. So a lot of it is calling out ways of working, ways of being, who gets what roles, who gets cast as what, who gets paid, who doesn't, who's volunteering work, who gets to sit at the table, who's a consultant, all this kind of stuff. And it's in universities, it's in the profession, it's in the field. So I have found myself kind of stepping into an advocacy position, working sometimes with casts who are trying to get equal pay, sometimes individuals who are trying to get a certain position in their institute or organizations, and have recently started working with the Craft Institute. There's a national, I want to say it's $2.5 million that has been allocated specifically for Black theater companies. Christian, this is for you. Joyous, this is for your company that you're going to set up later. That is focusing on Black companies that do Black work specifically. And the Craft Institute is one of those Black-run companies by Dr. Monica Ndunu. And she is one of the folks who's giving the grant money out. And I think her company also received a grant because of the work they're doing. So I've started working with them. It allows equal access or free access to all kinds of things. And the last workshop I did with them was related to negotiation, because like economics at home, some families and stuff raise people into knowing about how to do money and how to invest in this and do that. Other of us, maybe we didn't have that in negotiation. Everybody's just happy they're getting a check and happy you got a job, but actually, no, you should be getting $40,000 more. So I did a negotiation workshop, and now I'm working on a workshop with the Craft Institute about how to write to convince. And whether that's convincing somebody for a position, or convincing that somebody should get fired, or convincing that you deserve just as much as that one, or convincing, I find as a Black artist in the field, we are always having to make a case for what we do. And I think that's true for BIPOC folks in general. So that's where my advocacy is running these days. So thank you all for your attention. I look forward to reading the chat, and I turn it back over.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me turn it on. Thank you ever so much, Stephen. I think we're going until 5:15, and so we have just 15 minutes for some questions. I'm going to try to moderate. I'm going to try to take as many questions as I can find. Please feel free to raise your hand, and I will call on you. Jamila, can we begin with you?
Yes, sir. My mom has a question. Let me turn on the camera. My mom has a question. We are out of state. We're not currently in California, and she wanted to know about if it's possible to receive and sign up for getting money for a theater company here in our state, in Tennessee.
Stephen, I think that's for Stephen, isn't it?
What is it? Guess so, the question.
Can you get money in Tennessee for
Yeah.
your theater company?
Nubian Theater Company.
What's that? You're a new theater company?
Nubian Theater.
Nubian Theater Company. Yes, I should. You should put a way for me to let you connect with Monica Ndunu, and let's see how you can get some of that money, because millions of dollars has to go somewhere. Why not to you?
Yay! All right, thank you.
Yes,
It's good to know that we have ways to connect and you know, help each other out in other states.
I agree.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think somebody's connecting you in the chat. Tyler, did you have your hand up?
I didn't have my hand up, but I did do some cheering for the money question.
Okay.
But I do see that somebody else has their hand up now.
And that would be Thomas.
Hi, actually, I have a kind of just quick question for Camille. When you were speaking, you just had this question came to mind, which is, do you think we're still forming historical gaps today within history with Black and other BIPOC artists who are asked/choose to wear blackface, just like Burt Williams? Maybe not with the physical makeup, but with a mask of like stereotype, where performances and contributions are being forgotten because they're asked to take on the identity or persona of a different culture?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that. I do think that danger is always present, because I think a lot, even among people of African descent, that some of these roles, some of these characters at times, whether it's because of shame or not wanting to claim them, that there can be a turning away. And I think we need to engage even with those we find problematic, those images, right? I mean, I think, for instance, we are more and more having the conversation of, for instance, why is it that an African-American male comedian is often asked to, or somehow seems almost compelled to perform in drag, right? And has this kind of representation. At some point, there is a moment it seems in a career in which this is a demand made. And I think one of the conversations that can happen around it is like, where does that pressure come from? How do we understand the ways in which that how much is that a choice? How much is that an expectation of an industry that expects a certain kind of engagement? So this might be a pretty lightweight example compared to some of the kinds of stereotype we see, but we understand that there is still a certain amount of pressure about what forms of representation are admissible, are marketable. I think often the conversation can be reduced to a conversation about money, which ends up being a way to close down possibilities. And often there is the effort for artists of African descent to kind of create their own ways, but there is a need sometimes to depend on the market, and so, or to be engaged with it. So that desire to like let that continue to be in the conversation. I think actors experience, or performers experience, pressure to varying degrees even till today. How many, Black performers, for instance, are able to really greenlight a project? In other words, make sure that it's a go. And how often are we finding a level of compromise, even among those who are very prominent, that we wouldn't have imagined? So I think that is still happening, and the conversation has to continue about not just the faces that we see, but how much power are they actually carrying, and to really engage that, because so often we might imagine that some of our Black performers and artists have a great deal more access and pull than they often do have, right? I mean, love those faces, love the presence, to how much is the pay and how much is that power that we're actually seeing to shape the industry, not just get to be a part of it, right? Not just to engage, but to actually shape its direction. So those conversations need to keep happening. I hope that kind of gets at part of what you're talking about, but I think it can seem that it's not an issue, but it still is. I think we need to talk about it maybe in somewhat different ways. Oh, I'm hearing, perhaps I'm New Jersey here, talking too fast, perhaps.
No, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Camille, I wonder if you would consider the movie Precious as one of those glimpses into uncomfortable Blackness.
Yes, I do find that. And, I find that one of the things that really has amazed me is, gosh, back when we were in movie theaters, the ways in which to support certain movies, communities would often rent theaters. And what those communities would sometimes be able to do is support not just the movie, but the possibility of conversations that might happen after it. I don't know to what extent we're really seeing that happening as much, but that engagement with, we decide which stories are the stories we can feel good about, and the stories that are uncomfortable, they get often buried or set aside. And we can get into this kind of question of, well, are we dealing in stereotype? And I think what we're always wanting to do is remember also, who are we speaking to and for, right? And that idea of the representation that we do is about a politics of respectability also limits the ways in which we understand ourselves and we understand what our experience can be on the screen or in any other space. So that is one of those kind of places, oh, well, when we finally get a chance to have, this kind of movie, that's the one that does well. And yet, even a movie like Black Panther, I mean, there was a lot of concern about Michael Jordan's character and this kind of tension between him and Chadwick Boseman. And so even a movie that seems to get it all right, we can still have these kind of tangled conversations, and they need to happen. The ways in which we think about representation is something that we need to be willing to engage, right? And we will not all agree, but I think these are really important questions and conversations to have.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Please go ahead. I saw a hand go up. Please go ahead.
I think that might have been my hand, Yvonne.
Okay.
So I have a question, and really it started with Joyce's presentation and thinking about the role of the editor vis-a-vis other people associated with creating the story, and how there are many hands that the story could pass through. And I'm just wondering, to take it a step further, if any of the panelists think about archetypal stories and how those stories change according to the vehicle. I think Stephen's venturing into Afrofuturism, putting together a historical narrative that's very much rooted in a traditional place, but then moving it to a place where it could be appreciated by other folks is a kind of archetypal retelling. And I think that Christian and Joyce and Camille have all talked about these ways in which these kinds of stories mutate or can be fit into different kinds of tellings. I'm just curious if there are archetypes that inspire you or that you think of that when you think about what's the best form to tell a certain story.
Would anybody in the panel want to take a shot at it? Joyous.
Sure. So I think that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. For me personally, when I think about the stories that I want to tell and create, there's not a single particular archetype that came to the top of my mind, but I do find myself gravitating towards just reproductions or remediations of a particular type of story, but in different forms, whether that's poetry or nonfiction or putting it in a film. So currently I'm working on a project that has to do with the generations of women in my family, just because I really appreciate that familial dynamic and want to just explore that more, especially because of how I grew up, not necessarily being physically around the women in my family, just because of my family moved from Tennessee to California when I was younger. And so I'm actually exploring that. So I would say for me, in terms of archetypes and different things that I kind of gravitate towards, or different structures or conventions, it definitely has to do with family structures, whether that's conventional or non-conventional, and then using that as a vehicle to explore different things, whether that's about myself or those particular molds and frameworks.
Great. Thank you. Stephen, could I ask a question of you? I wonder, what do masks represent to you? What is the range of possibilities that you see embedded in masks? Masks are so amazing because they can be used for exactly the opposite things. Masks are what the audience or you make of them. I was wondering what attracts you to masks?
I love the transformational quality of masks, and I can change where I'm from. I can go further into where I'm from. I can be a woman. I can be old. I can be a baby. I can be a priest. I can be a, and it goes on and on forever, forever, forever. So part of, I mean, this has come up in different, like a workshop I did that had basically the exploration was, what does it mean to have only Black and BIPOC folks in a training scenario? What can come out when it's not mixed company? And I remember one of the Black women in that, she did some mask work and did some work, and she brought out people from her neighborhood growing up that she's somebody who's trained in different universities, but she was able to bring that up in this space because she knew who was watching it, and she knew what the understanding would be about bringing these people who talk like this, who have these desires, and there's something different that happens with a mask. It gives you a different kind of permission to, at the same time, go further outside of yourself and further into yourself simultaneously.
Thank you. I don't mean for Stephen to necessarily hug the time, but there's another question for you, Stephen. Wayne has a question in the chat, and Wayne, do you want to speak to it?
Sure. Actually, my question is for Christian, because Christian had, I think your talk is called "The Masks We Wear," and I was just wondering, like, being on this panel, thinking about how you were thinking about masks for that play, and then how you see, Dr. Boucher, his masks, and how you see those things related.
Good question, Wayne. So yes, masks. In my show that I did, We Wear the Mask. Masks definitely have always had the transformational aspect for me, not only for our identities, but for me personally, my premise of mask wearing has always been about reclaiming our time and our space. So it's been more about the masks that we wear in this time and times that we've had in the past. So for that particular show, the potential protagonist Walter would travel between different eras. He will start from the birth of Africa to our current time as it is now. And I think when you take an individual or that type of agency from a Black perspective, is like, how do we shape ourselves from going from the beginning to where we are now? There's this very thrilling musical called African Footprint. One of my friends, referenced me to, by Richard Loring, and it sort of gives this entire trajectory about how Africa as a continent, really spanned its history, its culture from its birth to what is now. And I think when I think about masks in particular, it's not just about how we see ourselves, but it's sort of like, how do we transform our time and our history? So it's sort of like, if I were to wear a mask in front of anyone in this room, it would be different, and that perception would change for you. And I think that's something about performance in and of itself that is thrilling. And I think it speaks to a lot about we as artists performing now in 2021. What does it mean for us to be creating now? What does it mean for us to actually be reclaiming our agency as artists, our agency as creators and students and innovators in this art form? So to answer the question, what does it mean to wear a mask in today? It's more about what type of mask do you want to wear in this time, and what does that agency represent?
Well, great. I think we have come to the end of our time, and I know that I have to be leaving shortly. So I would like to thank, first of all, our panel for these wonderful, thought-provoking presentations that give us an inner glimpse of how you construct your art, the meaning that you attempt to imbue in it, despite the fact that the audience comes with its own impressions and makes up its own mind. Joyous, thank you for making that point. It's a wonderful interaction between intentionality and interpretation that lies at the heart of performativity. And that's the beauty, I think, of art. And I think in different ways, you have each captured it. Christian, Joyous, Camille, and Stephen, thank you ever so much for making this such an invigorating event. I'm going to ask Adana to close us out. I think she, Adana, I can see you. Please go ahead.
Yes, perfect. Well, thank you all for coming. I'm going to launch a poll in just a second. So if you can fill out the poll and give us a little bit of that feedback about this event, that would be really helpful for all of us to create more wonderful spaces like this in the future. So I'm going to launch it right now. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate your support of CRASH.
Thank you very much. So we fill out this now and then we can sign out. Is that correct? Okay, great. Whoa. My survey disappeared.
I think whoever launched the survey took off a little too soon.
Oh. There you go.
It's back. It's back.
There you go. I think we'll have 2 results probably for the poll. That's fine.
Polling irregularities. We're okay with that. They work if they work for us. Yeah.
Great. And then we're going to do a little check-in at the end for the AP staff. And if you all have any questions for us, feel free to email us and let us know what you thought, or, you know, if there's something that we can do to improve. We really appreciate having the presenters here. And Yvonne, thanks for moderating. That was amazing.
Thank you ever so much for the opportunity. Really enjoy this. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I think that's the end of the poll. All right. Oh, someone, let me. Okay. All right. Let me take one person out of the. Okay. Perfect. So that went well, I think. I think it was a little bit like I had a feeling we were going to run a little short on time. So, but it went well. So.
Should we stop the recording?
Oh, good idea. See, there were just so many things going on.
I don't know if you all saw in the chat that Kay Wang Yang